Hello and welcome to this video on the Gospel of John, again part of the Campus Commonwealth Academy and MTA session to meet in early January. In this video I'm going to cover some of the introductory background material on the structure of the Gospel of John and some of the prominent themes in the Gospel of John. The content of the Gospel of John is not like any of the other synoptic Gospels. It doesn't contain any of the explicit teachings on possessions, divorce, and the like in the synoptic Gospels. It's actually centered in a single revelation that's introduced in the famous prologue of John 1, and it's this. The thrust of the entire Gospel is that Jesus himself is the one sent from God to bring life and light. And in that initial prologue of John 1, all of the key terms that are then repeated and used and appropriated throughout the Gospel of John are introduced. Light, darkness, Father, Son, glory, and a number of others. And it uses these terms to deliver different kinds of messages by unpacking some of the central claims in the prologue. And it does this through a lot of lengthy discourses, ones that we're not used to if we've only read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the Mosaic Law plays an important role, but it doesn't seem as explicit as it does in the other Gospels. Now, perhaps with the exception of John 5:39 to 40, or John and verses 46 to 47 in John 5. But the focus is Christological. The focus is on the Messiah, and Judaism is viewed through this lens. The author is most likely John, son of Zebedee, one of the apostles. The date of this composition is perhaps 90 AD, in the early 90s. The recipients were these growing messianic communities in the Roman imperial provinces, perhaps in Antioch or beyond, Syria. These Christian communities were now growing to pretty large sizes. They were now composed of slaves and had some landowners and others, and now with a larger group, with a greater and a diverse composition of members, it was starting to rival other large groups. And I think that created some tensions with the synagogues and other members of the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, the dispersion of Jews throughout the Roman Empire. So the term aposynagogos, right, to be put out of the synagogue, takes on very important meaning in the Gospel of John that it didn't in other places. Perhaps you can recall in the beginning of Acts, it still seems as if the early Christians are going to synagogues, right? Of course, they were starting to transform the life of those synagogues, which can't necessarily be reduced to just a location. The synagogue was a lot of things all at once. It was a central community institution that the families came together to build as a way of handling economy and family matters and, of course, worship. All of these were integrated in one. So when Christians started emerging within these synagogues, it very much did cause them to have to struggle to redefine their life together. So that's what this gospel is trying to address, but in numerous places in the Roman Empire. It also provides material on Jesus' power to unite a new people around himself and the Father. It also seeks to undermine these early Gnostic heterodoxies and teachings as well. The emphasis of John's Gospel is, again, it is introduced right at the beginning in John 1. The incarnation is God's decisive entrance and renewal of all earthly creation. You can see this at times expressed in the I am statements of Jesus, right? These I am statements are an invitation to seek after Jesus and to become part of this new family of God. And to overcome that, you have to overcome a certain alienation. And this alienation is caused or is carried out in the world, as it says, right? It's a translation of cosmos. It's this totality that has not welcomed God. So it's not necessarily referring to the earth, right, or the world per se, but it's referring to this giant total that is, in a sense, that does encompass the world in which one lives, But it's this totality that has not welcomed God. In John 1, right, there's an important statement made that the most important one is in verse 12 and 13, that God has granted the gift of authority to become children of God. That is actually the centerpiece statement around which several other verses are constructed as a chiasm. It's kind of like a concentric circle, and the center of it is verses 12 and 13. And that's what this gospel is trying to deliver, that through this light and life of Jesus in this darkness, God is recreating a new people. So let's walk through a few of the other themes. So this Logos, as we know, expresses the unity of the Father, or the wisdom of God, the prophetic word of God with Jesus. Jesus shows this through some of his I am statements. The I am statements very much take on attributes of God from the Old Testament. So John 3 verse 31, John 6 verse 51 to 58, he says he has come down from heaven. John 8:23, you are of this world, I am not of this world. That is, I'm united to the Father. I have not been fragmented and disjointed and alienated. The man from heaven, right? The incarnation emphasizes the human and the divine jointly. That would give Platonists some fits, because the Platonists in many ways saw this earthly reality as lesser, as inferior to this other reality, and that they occupied exclusive realms. But Jesus, as both this, right, he redefines the notion of the Logos as the organizing principle of human life that sets human life apart from anything else. But this, right, this Logos has become flesh. It's not just a beautiful and perhaps pristine concept that one achieves through philosophical reflection. It's actually something that's now come to humans, right? It's joined heaven and earth together. Something that they just thought would not occur because they devalued the here, the earthly. So this Logos become flesh sets up shop with us. He eats, he drinks, he weeps at Lazarus' grave. Right, all of those covered in John 4 verse 7, John 19 verse 28, John 11:35 is when he weeps. He strips off his outer clothing in John 13 3 through 5 and washes feet. He was abused, he was wounded, he was killed. He is a rejected God, something that again was repulsive to the Hellenistic mind as well as to the Jewish mind of the times. Perhaps in the Jewish notion, considering all the writings of the prophets and the Torah, they knew that God would suffer. God was with his people, bound to them in many ways, and dedicated to them. So they were aware of the suffering, but certainly not in the flesh. So God has very much done the impossible to save us. In the verse in John it says, no one has ever seen God, but the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, has exegeted him, exegesato, right? He has interpreted him, has revealed him. That's in John 1:18. Jesus is the definitive interpretation in human form of God, and thus of the will of God. This gospel deconstructs the dualism that governs Gnostic thought. Contrary to later Gnostic Redeemer myths, both creation and redemption are one. It's not that one God created the world and another God redeemed it. Of course, implying that the one who redeemed it is superior to the one who created it, a place of decay and of corruption. So this gospel brings the two of them together. There's an emphasis on loving one another. Right? Jesus abides. You'll see a lot of these words for abiding, remaining, dwelling, alighting. Right, that's very important because it emphasizes the role of time, of attention to Jesus, and of course there's a lot of metaphors, right, of unity with Jesus that matches the unity of the Father and the Son. So ingesting the flesh and blood of the Son, John 6:35 through 39, a hard one, of course, to accept and to swallow, pun intended. There's also the Good Shepherd, right, and the sheep that follow him. the sheep that have been given by the Father in John 10, 1 through 30. He is the vine, we are the branches. Later on in John 10, verse 15, right? We identify with him very deeply, in other words. We are sent out on the same mission, and we face the same rejection that Jesus did. That's there in John 15, 8 through 21, 17, verse 15 to 18, and 20, verse 21, as it says, "So I send you." Then there's also a theme about glorifying the Father and the Son together. John 14, 12 through 14 states, "So that the Father may be glorified in the Son." There's 7 miraculous signs. Not just the I am statements seem to structure the gospel, but there's also these signs, right? These mighty works that serve as signs of Jesus' authority from the Father. Each miracle establishes an occasion for some kind of discourse, some kind of speech or talk from Jesus. For example, John 6, 1 through 14, the feeding is followed by the bread of life discourse or talk by Jesus. So these works are instrumental to the larger goal of glorifying God before the world, as finally and ultimately stated in John 20, verse 31. Of course, with this comes an emphasis on love, which is very clearly portrayed in John 13. Jesus gives a new command, meaning not that nobody had ever heard about loving one another, but that it's new and that it's forever new. It's always meant to be represented, to be brought up again and again. And that this love command is demonstrated in action. That's what love entails. It's humble service. It immediately precedes, imagine, the passion narrative. Jesus washes this feet, gives them this new command about love, and then goes on and embodies it to the fullest. Also the laying down of one's life in John 12 to 14, and also verse 17 of John 15. Jesus' death sets the cruciform life as the norm for discipleship. There's no sentimental complacency, right? Through Jesus and this new family, this new abiding relationship, there's an alternative life, right? There's an alternative even culture, a way of looking at relationships, at authority, at everything differently. And these become the staples of church life. Jesus emphasizes through this that my kingdom is not of this world. So therefore you are making a risky decision in converting, as it says in John 3 with the talk with Nicodemus. Even when it comes to something like idolized world powers. In John 18 verse 36 or John 19, Jesus even there subverts Roman power to God's power. And again, the statement in John 1 that states we are to be born children of God. We are not born of the will of the flesh, nor by the will of a man, nor by blood. Each of those 3 images are unpacked and given sort of flesh and bones in different stories throughout the Gospel of John. Not born by the will of the flesh, Nicodemus' nighttime talk with Jesus, even the man born blind in John 9. Not born of the will of man seems to be evident in the talk about the living water with the Samaritan woman. You can see even the role of water in the Gospel of John. It's there with the Samaritan woman. It's there in John 9 when Jesus mixes water and earth, right, reminiscent of Genesis 1, to cleanse this man, to wash him, so that he's now able to see the doubts and the uncertainty and the other problems in the reactions of others to his healing. So, and then eventually, right, not by the power or by blood, born of blood, that's confronted by the resurrection to defeat the powers of death. So again, it's very powerful. There's so many layers at work that require a careful reading. If anything, the Gospel of John will make it clear to us that we have to read attentively, we have to read slowly. Every word counts. In a world where we are usually reading to get the point, or to get to the point, the Gospels call us to a reading that very much puts us at odds with the pace of life most of the time. But when we do so, the benefits are truly, truly great, and can form us into the kinds of disciples that can truly pay attention to the signs of the times. Anyway, this is the session this is a session on the Gospel of John. Stay tuned to the next videos. Thank you.